Through sport, Craig has shed light on this ongoing fight for freedom for refugees, with sports players from all over the country raising their voices towards this issue. Please make him feel welcome.
Thank you to Dirrum Dirrum and all the students for this invitation to speak to you, both in Canberra, all those in the room, and indeed around the world. I want to just start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I am now here in Sydney. Of course, you are in Canberra as well. I want to talk to you about an issue briefly tonight that's another one that Australia desperately and urgently needs to overcome. But let's start with a bit of positivity. It's an amazing place that we live in, with many wonderful, creative and warm people from all over the world. There are many things about which we can be very proud and pleased, others which need change and to contest, and still other aspects, too many it seems to me at the moment, of which we must be genuinely ashamed and must urgently speak out, act out and change. But we can all make a difference. I saw that through the Save Hakeem campaign, probably 18 months ago or so now, when so many of us in Australia and around the world came together as a people, and we decided that we wanted to see a better world. It's in our hands with every action we take every day. These are the aspects where I'm spending some time and energy, most of mine anyway, whether through sport or otherwise, and for those that come afterwards, for your generation. And it's a huge burden that we're passing on to you. And as you just heard from two wonderful Australians, Emma and David, our responsibility is to urgently solve some of these matters to pass on to the next generation, including, of course, my three children and all the students in the room and around the world. We can discuss many of these issues, which you have throughout the past couple of days, whether the pollution of the climate action issue, the lack of accountability of political figures, and the seemingly constant scandal and polemic, as everything, it seems, even a pandemic, is politicised for gain. Point-scoring exercise, even when innocent people are dying. The world today has lost the ability to actually debate. Sides must be taken, fights must be waged, and the issue is too often lost altogether. I'm going to talk to you now about one of those. It pertains to asylum seekers and refugees, particularly those in Australia's mandatory offshore detention system, indefinite detention system, who are still stranded after more than 7 years. Much of my time is advocating for social change through sport, and here I see the broader problems through the lens of refugees, that of the difference between human rights, political matters, and those that are or become politicised. It's a very important distinction to make, particularly in sport. Human rights are immutable, written into international law, conventions, declarations, and other instruments, and they exist for every single one of us, irrespective of any difference or what some people would term barriers. They exist even though a government of the day anywhere in the world might legislate to take them away from us momentarily. Refugees have human rights, the right to seek safety under international law, that is, to seek asylum, and if they pass the 5-point test of well-founded fear of persecution, to become a refugee provided refuge. The problem in this country at present is that they've become deeply, almost entirely politicised. Sport will then say, well, we can't say too much about them or speak up for them, but it's too political. Well, no, it's not. It's simply human rights that we're arguing for. Pure equality of human beings, that each of us must be treated with dignity and respect. And there must be a minimum standard of treatment below which this country will not descend, irrespective of who we're talking about, whether they're from here or anywhere abroad. With refugees sent offshore to Manus and Nauru, we breached this standard, I'm sorry to say, a long, long time ago. 19th of July 2013, asylum seekers coming by boat were sent offshore, never to come here, as it was said by politicians at the time and even till now. What we did was very straightforward. We solved one really serious problem simply by creating another. Thousands of people were put into cages, human pens. 13 died. But the self-harm and the psychological trauma that that's caused over the last 7 years alone is catastrophic. Why are they so politicised? Well, because multiple governments decided to leverage the fear that Australia had. Not about the deaths at sea anymore. I mean, why would the government try to paint them out as dangerous when they're patently not? They're innocent people who had the right to seek safety and a better life. In fact, several Attorney Generals in recent years said in Senate estimates publicly there is no risk. Malcolm Turnbull, the former PM, said we know who they are. There's no problem with them. It's just that we say they can't come here. So the issue ceased to be the boats or security, the way it's been framed many years ago, and yet they're still locked up. Why? Well, it's because Australia's been convinced improperly that they're inhuman, that they're not worthy of care, and that they can be treated worse than animals, truly. And too many of us have been prepared to turn a blind eye to what our country has been doing. In order to try to force them to return from where they fled, we have mistreated the most vulnerable people on the planet, those who don't have a state, don't have a home, and are forced into the arms of others. The past several decades have been, and particularly the last decade, has been a triumph of negative messaging. And this is where the power of the media is so extraordinarily important, to hold media accountable and to have really strong diversification of media laws. There's been a constant barrage of attempts to paint asylum seekers and refugees as subhuman. And you know what? It's worked spectacularly. How do we know this? Well, otherwise it would be impossible for a country of marvellous people like ours, like Australia, to be in a position where we will allow the ongoing torture of innocent people, which is continuing today. Naturally, when you're trying to keep several thousand, or today around 400 still, trapped offshore in Port Moresby and in Nauru, are incarcerated in some way, whether behind wire or the several hundred who are in hotel rooms 23 hours a day in Australia now, in Mantra or Kangaroo Point. In order to do this, it requires a consistent, coordinated and ever-changing list of charges against them. So for those young people in the room, the students and those listening around the world, I urge you to do this. Just be careful of listening to messages. Be careful of listening to the demonisation of people, whether by religion, by colour, by race, by nationality, because we can see in the history of the world that it works. It works. And sadly, asylum seekers and refugees within the Australian context are very much caught in that trap. I speak to wonderful people every day, friends, you know, who are close to me, who are incredible people. They're working in charities, they're doing extraordinary things every day. And even they will say, oh yeah, but those people. And I have to say to them, guys, it's actually not true what you're saying. Let me give you the facts. The problem is when you have this constant barrage of, you know, negative messaging, creating an improper, inaccurate narrative around them, is that the facts don't matter. Reason and logic has deserted these poor people, as it's deserted Australia in this space. There's no reason and logic. How could Australia keep people locked up for 7 years? It's not possible. Not in the country I grew up in, but it's possible here today. And that needs to be changed. You know, we had many children offshore, and just some of the issues around it that I think really sum up how heinous it's been. There were hundreds of children offshore in detention. The United Nations, the Human Rights Commissions, all around the world, including in Australia, said you can't keep them locked up indefinitely. It's not possible. It's inhumane. Think of your children. I certainly think of mine. And yet, we still, as a country, and different governments are being involved here. That's why you're so important. That's why I'm using my voice to speak out for them, because we have to make this change. And people had to run a campaign, it was called Kids Off Nauru, in order to get children out of detention centres and get them into community where they could go to school, where they could start to live as children should. That's extraordinary, don't you think? That it wasn't governments of Australia who said, you know, that's improper, we're going to open that up, we're going to let these people, you know, out, these kids. No, not at all. It took a huge campaign, a huge fight. And when I look at that, you know, as an Australian who's so proud of what we are in so many ways, I'm deeply ashamed that that is what had to happen. And yet at the moment where there's many campaigns still going, one with Amnesty that I'm leading is called Game Over, and that is to resettle everyone offshore, almost 400 people still trapped after 7 years. Consider also that some MPs and lawyers from Australia put a case to the International Criminal Court that Australia had tortured these people under international law. Just reflect on that for a moment. The ICC actually disagreed because the convention is against torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. What they said was, we don't think it actually goes to the extent of torture. We're not prepared to say that anyway. But yes, it certainly is cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. That's true. That's where we are today. But I don't criticise the people of Australia because for many years I wasn't speaking out on this. I know, you know, the power of the messaging. I know the narrative that has placed these people in really, let's be honest, a living hell. But with all of you and with me and with the high-profile people that you've got at your wonderful festival this year and through sport, and we've got many legends of sport who are stepping up and speaking out, including you know, Frank Farina and Liz Ellis and Nikki Dryden and Olympians. Paul Roos has been in support, and you know, all of the wonderful Australians, whether Brian Brown and Anthony Pully are the actors, or Jimmy Barnes, who sent a guitar down to Moz, who's one of these refugees after 7 years, who's trapped in a hotel, the Mantra in Melbourne. But it's not enough. We need more. When I went to Port Moresby last October, I wanted to see for myself as an Australian. I said, okay, we've helped this young man, Hakeem Al Arabi, a refugee, and because he was a sports person, was part of the reason why Australia stepped forward so beautifully and led an international campaign. You did. Many, many people in Australia. But there's other refugees who don't necessarily play sport. And why are they any different, I thought? They need my help in an equal measure because they're equal people. They're equal to you and they're equal to me. So I went to Port Moresby to see them for myself. And what I found was horrendous. I met an Iranian doctor who after 7 years has such horrible psychiatric problems and depression that he can barely hold a sentence. So much antidepressant medication is he having to take every morning just to get through the day because there's no hope for them. There's actually no solution to where they're going to go. And they watch Australia. They have mobile phones. And this is one of the worst parts of this whole scenario, this whole saga. They watch the press, they watch the media, they watch the politicians, they hear what's said about them. They see how people are trying to characterise them as improper. Do you know a huge amount of them actually were given refugee status years ago. Some of them have become my good friends now. They're still locked up in hotels in Australia right now. One of them was given refugee status 3 years ago, and he's still locked up. And yet you might hear, well, these people, you know, they're not refugees or they shouldn't have done. No, it's actually completely wrong. They're refugees, and we're responsible for them. It's our duty of care. And yet every care that we've given them as human beings has been through the court process. Every care that we've given them has been through public campaigns. Every care that we've given them has been through caring people, grandmothers for refugees, lawyers for refugees, people for refugees, sports people for refugees. But the country itself is yet unmoved, and that can't be right. Let me tell you a story. We've only got a few minutes left. In speaking to some of the guys in Port Moresby, they recounted how in the first 3 years, in order to put them in such a situation of pain that they simply would just give up and go home, to where the vast majority of them are in mortal danger. They were behind wire for 3 years. They had no mobile phones. In fact, the mobile phones were given to them by the Papua New Guinean Supreme Court. And after 3 years of not opening the gate, thousands of people behind wire. It's inhuman. Lawyers took the case to the PNG Supreme Court, and PNG said it is inhuman under our international human rights obligations to do this. Despite the fact that we're receiving all this money from the Australian government, we will not let this happen on our shore anymore. It was 3 years. They couldn't get out. So what happened, they told me, was that, of course, back in Australia, people knew that this was occurring. And so there was a day, in a couple of weeks, say, when the gate was going to be open between morning and night. They had to come back, of course. So they waited for this day. And on Manus Island, the detention, what they call a prison, is right next to the water. Imagine sitting next to tropical water for 3 years and you can't touch it. The gate opened on this particular day. Where would you go? Where would you rush? What would you do? I'd go for a swim. That's what I'd do. They ran straight into the water. And there was a newspaper in Australia that had sent a photographer, and they snapped a photo of these men after 3 years having a swim. And the next day it was on the front page of a national newspaper saying, holiday in paradise. That's how you create a narrative around innocent people. That's how you get a country to not care about them. Because you characterise them in a way that's inhuman. Well, they're not. They're human beings, and we need to help them. 5 years ago, when the issue from 2013 was long past solved, was long past gone, New Zealand stepped forward and said, we'll take them. And New Zealand seemed to be doing that far too often to us today. Whether it's in relation to climate change or any other issue. They said, we'll take them. We don't agree with what's happening. So we'll take 150 per year. Do you know that Australia said no? The Australian government said, we won't accept the offer. Because after 5 years, the theory went, after 5 years of being in New Zealand, they can then come here. It's one of the most ridiculous, disgusting arguments that I've seen in this country for a long, long time. That's how you know that it's politicised, because there's no logic, there's no reason, there's no compassion, and there's no humanity. And do you know what this country needs to recover for all of ourselves? Reason, logic, compassion, and humanity. And when we do those four things, we're going to solve a lot of the problems that we currently face, including some of those that this current pandemic has exposed and some that this current pandemic has created. There's 400 people still trapped offshore. There's several hundred in hotels here. That's 600. If Australia accepted that deal 5 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about this today. And we wouldn't have the self-harm, the attempted suicides, and the horrible human cost of both the refugees and all of these incredible people expending so much energy to try and get them out, carry them forward, and I would say to carry Australia forward. It's critically important that we solve this issue. I know there's many others, All of us feel strongly about Indigenous rights. I fight for them every day. All of us feel strongly about climate action. We all are advocating for that and doing everything that we possibly can. At the same time, we've got 600 asylum seekers and refugees who are human beings. They're not animals, and we have to help them, and only you and I can. It's time to let them go. Please go to gameover.org.au, and on that site you'll see some information, you'll see some historical context, you'll see some of the interviews I did with these people, these friends of mine from offshore, and also from some of the places of detention in Australia. You have an opportunity to sign up to the petition there, and we need as many voices as we possibly can across Australia. I'd also urge to the wonderful students who put together what's a really outstanding and important festival annually, issues which go to the very heart of who we are. I'd encourage you to bring your other students on board. I'd encourage you to send this video and the website out to other schools, and let's get everyone involved. Why? Why should we not? Because it's political? Well, that's where we started. It's not political. It's just simply human rights. It may be politicised, but many things are politicised, including the well-being and the health of the planet. These poor people have been deeply politicised, but they're human beings and they have human rights. Please, join us with the Game Over campaign. Let's move Australia forward, and let's let these people get on with their lives. Thank you.